Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Vatsky, the Director of Multifamily Housing and Community Facilities with the Washington State Finance Commission, Housing Finance Commission. This is our second presentation on changes to the bond program for 2022 and beyond. I've got a handful of staff on the call. A handful of us will be making the presentation today. In addition to myself, Claire Peterski, who's the manager of the bond program, Carrie Williams, who is our marketing and outreach person lead, Eli Lieberman, who's our energy lead. But then we have our full staff on, Sojung Choi, Shukri Rodel, Jason Hennigan, Yasno, Tanya Scratchley, Dan Rothman. So please use the chat for questions and raise your hand. We'll pause intermittently during the presentation to gather questions and discussion. And about Bob Peterson, thank you, Bob. And we have a lot to go through. I'm assuming we'll get through it in the 2 hours, but I certainly want to leave room for time for discussion and questions. So I'll just kind of hop right in. So next slide. So for the discussion today, again, I just wanted to reiterate that we're resetting, redefining, really pivoting and shifting to a values and outcomes-based approach. So we have a whole new allocation process. We did an overview of the values, outcomes, and new allocation flow in our May 26th presentation. I will do a brief overview of that again today. We will have a separate page up. We don't yet with the recordings and the PowerPoints from all these presentations. So they will be on our website, hopefully in the next couple of days. But today we're really going to focus on our threshold criteria and our points and ranking system. So that's the focus of our discussion today. So I think next slide gets us again, we've created specific targets and outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Those are in the acquisition rehab versus new construction. So setting a target for 15 to 25% of our resources going to acquisition rehab. Projects financed with public investment, 50 to 60% of the allocation going to publicly leveraged projects. And then outside King and Snohomish counties, up to 40% of the allocation going to outside of King and Snohomish counties. And then in terms of our point ranking system, we've really streamlined the points, put some of the points into thresholds, meaning that you have to have them in order to apply. And we'll walk through all those, but the main focus of our points at this point is really going to be by and for people of color and communities of color, or Black and Indigenous people of color, and then cost efficiency. So those are the two main ranking criteria, although we still will have additional points for other things that we'll discuss. So next slide. So as we shared in our last presentation, in terms of the new allocation process, we're really looking at just one round in 2022. That would be in early March. We will require an intent to apply 60 days prior to that, hoping to get a sense of the lay of the land. As I've mentioned now, we are going to require some threshold criteria to apply. We've streamlined the points. One of the main tenets of this new allocation process is really trying to compare like projects. And we've set floors and ceilings for how we would allocate those outcomes and targets. Next slide. Oh, so so this is our new flow chart. So folks will apply and come into the application pool and then be divided into either new production or acquisition rehab. From there, they'll go from being separated into whether they've got public leverage or no public leverage in each of those buckets. And then from there, further broken down into Seattle King or Balance Estate for publicly leveraged deals, or King and Snohomish versus Balance Estate for non-publicly leveraged deals. From there, then they get ranked. And then once they're ranked, we kind of overlay the targets. So the next slide, please. We'll define public leverage in a little bit, but then from there, we apply the targets and adjust the list so that, again, we're at least reaching 15% acquisition rehab, but no more than 25%. We would be at least shooting for 50% publicly leveraged deals, but no more than 60%, and then 40% Balance Estate or outside King, Snohomish counties. Next slide. So now we're going to start talking about the thresholds. Although I think there should be a slide about public leverage. Let's see what the next slide is.
There is a slide about public leverage. Let's go just quickly back up one. We would use the same definition for public leverage as we currently have in our policies, unless we hear some other thoughts. And the policies should be in the on our website, and I'm happy to link to this.
But basically, it's state, it's other local. It's local funds, state funds like the Housing Trust Fund. It can be federal funds like USDA or HUD direct capital funding. It's not guarantees. It's direct funding investment. And there will be threshold criteria for how you access the public leverage criteria buckets or targets. So, and yeah, I hope there's a slide for that.
Okay, let's go now to just what the new program thresholds would be for Balance Estate, which in this case means outside of King and Snohomish counties. It's having 20% of the units set aside for people at 50% of local area median income. And King and Snohomish County, in addition to having to meet that threshold, we also have a sliding scale for points for greater set-asides. And I'll talk about that when we get to the points section, but this is just on thresholds. Go ahead to the next slide. Also, a threshold is that you should have at least 20% of the units need to be for people with disabilities or large households. You could do a mix. And the commission does not require special accommodations in a unit for it to be considered a disabled unit, and has had a fairly liberal ability for managers to certify people as disabled. And if you have questions about that, happy to go into that. But I'll hit the next slide because we don't have so much time.
And so actually, let's hold up a minute. Robin does have a question about the threshold on the election of 20 at 50. Even though that is the minimum, that is one of the federal set-asides, yes, you could do more than that, but as a threshold requirement for Balance Estate projects, you have to have at least 20% at 50%.
I just make sure of one thing, do you mind?
Yes, please go ahead.
I guess what I'm asking is, I understand that the threshold in a rent chart is 20% to 50%. I'm asking that does not mean that you have to take the minimum. You still could take the minimum set aside at 40% at 60.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Another threshold is that we are required to consider community revitalization plans as a part of the tax code. This has been a category we've had points, and we have scrutinized as staff community revitalization plans, and by making this threshold, we're going to loosen this up considerably and still do our best to meet the requirements of the tax code. So to be in a community revitalization plan, the project must be in a federal, state, regional, or local community revitalization plan area. So all you'll need to do is submit a copy of the plan and show the project location in the boundaries of that plan. Before, we had some requirements about it had to be showed that was economic development in that plan, that money had been committed. We won't have any of those requirements. And the other way you could potentially qualify is being in a QCT or DDA and in a very high or high opportunity area, or in an area of low environmental health disparities put forth. There's a study by the University of Washington, and we will have a link to that. And my question to people present is, do you think that most projects or all projects would be able to meet this, or are there projects that would not be in some sort of community revitalization plan? And I think most will qualify, but just throwing it out there. Go ahead and hit the next slide while people think about that question.
Well, before, this is Brian.
Okay, we can go back. Go ahead.
It's hard for me to guess, but it seems to me like there are some projects maybe in smaller jurisdictions where there may not be a community revitalization plan. And then if you're not in a QC or DDA, then you can't meet this threshold. So I don't know. I feel like this is it's a risky one to make a threshold. So I'm curious why you're changing it from points to threshold.
We would have eliminated it, Brian, if we could have gotten away with it, but it is in the tax code. And the intent of this, apparently, why it is the tax code, is because they don't want low-income housing. When this was conceived of, putting income for poor people in a slum was sort of like they wanted to make sure that at least if it's going into a low-income neighborhood, that there's opportunities for people in that neighborhood. Thinking about projects that we have had in rural Washington, looking at some of the portfolio projects that we've had just recently, I think all of the smaller cities at least had something for West Richland or for the whole Tri-Cities area. Because we're being much more loose about how these are being defined, I think we should be able to find something that'll help be in a community revitalization plan area before we had it very narrowly defined. I know from researching this, some states actually, and it's true that the tax code doesn't say it has to be a governmental revitalization plan area, that some states accept a nonprofit's plan to revitalize a community, which is something we could consider if that would broaden it.
So it kind of sounds like your intent is to include all projects and kind of check this box, if you will.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I'm totally fine with that. I just have to get my mind around, these used to be very important points for us to strive after, and there was kind of a barrier between us and these points. So you're switching that paradigm a little bit, and I take comfort in your desire not to exclude anyone, and I just hope that is the case when we actually, find that one project in that weird place that doesn't, for some reason, qualify, and cross that bridge when we get there, I guess.
And to that other question, I'm curious to find the project that might not qualify. So
Let
this
us
is
know.
yeah, let us know. Or
Yeah.
if you could think of one that you would be like struggling, then say, hey, Claire, can you make sure that the project that we did 5 years ago would still qualify?
Yeah, okay.
Being in an opportunity zone definitely qualifies. That, because that's a federally designated, there was a bunch of, originally, when I wrote this, I listed a whole bunch of federal programs, and I realized I don't need to put those all on a slide. There's a whole bunch of federal programs that would qualify. And in terms of high opportunity areas, those are as defined by the Puget Sound Council. We would continue to use
Regional
that.
council, right?
Regional council, thank you. So that is like we had before, for a point. And the area of low environmental or high environmental health disparity is a new link, and that's by the University of Washington for the entire state, unlike the high and very high opportunity area, which was just for Puget Sound.
Great.
Have I hit the things in the chat? I don't know. I'm not monitoring the
Yes,
chat. So,
I
okay,
am. You got it.
excellent. We'll go to the next slide then. So now to nonprofit sponsor. Everybody either is a nonprofit or has partnered with a nonprofit will have the same policy language. This should not be a problem for people to do.
So again, this becomes a threshold now.
Right,
No points.
no points. We are hoping that folks will give us a letter of intent. I've developed a lovely form that you could look at that tells in broad strokes what you have in mind 60 days in advance. This is to some extent for us to make so we know what projects are coming down the pike, but also because it will be public record, also other folks will know what's coming down the pike. This is to maybe make people feel a little bit better about this whole new bucket strategy. You'll kind of have an idea of who is already in your bucket and what they're planning to do. So that's why we're asking for this. And Robin, we're used as a threshold. What we're using as a threshold is for nonprofit partners exactly the same language as we had before. If you're interested in more, I don't know what I want to call it, more meaningful or deep or extensive partnerships, that'll be covered in the buy and for discussion that Carrie's going to cover.
And then this is just for the bond 4% program. The 9% program, we're not making very many changes in our 9% program at all. So, but this is just for the bond, the bond 4% program.
Okay, next slide. And these are just a couple of requirements just for the buckets. So let's go look at a couple buckets. Next slide. Oh, I'm going to go back to you because this is not my slide, Lisa.
Yeah, right. So again, as we're applying the targets and then ranking the lists, again, we've got thresholds in order to qualify for these outcomes. So in terms of acquisition rehab and public leverage, there will be threshold requirements to get into those buckets. So next slide. So for public leverage, in order to meet the public leverage definition for Seattle King County, you will need to have 10% of your total project costs. If you're a City of Seattle project, you will need to have 5% of your total project costs if you are King County outside of Seattle, and then 5% for balance of state. So you will have to have a certain amount of investment from public funders in total in order to compete in those public leverage buckets. And then next slide. We're not going to get into the acquisition rehab policies today. We have another presentation that we'll do next week that'll focus specifically on the acquisition rehab policies, but we will have separate policies for acquisition rehabs. So we're resetting and restructuring acquisition rehabs very separate and apart from new construction. So again, all we're really talking about today is is new construction, and we'll have a whole separate discussion about acquisition rehabs on June 10th, if you can join us for that. Okay, next slide. Ranking. So now we move into how are we going to rank within those lists that we showed up above. You know, we're going to create all these different buckets and compare like projects, and then we're going to rank within those buckets. And this is the criteria that we will use for that. Next slide. So I will turn this over to Carrie Williams now, who will walk us through the by and for BIPOC points.
Hi, everyone. Before I start, I just want to test my audio because I have trouble on Zoom calls with many people. So please jump in, Lisa, or any of the team to tell me if I start getting fuzzy. This is our category for by and for BIPOC communities. In our hastiness to put together slides, we have not updated the total points available in this category on the left. The total will in fact be 26 points. And we've broken it down into 4 different areas. All of this has come from much research on best practices in terms of community engagement and racial equity planning. It's also come from extensive reaching out to communities, including the survey that we sent out several weeks ago, to which many of you responded with our thanks, and to with individual interviews that we've done with various entities and individuals. But we realized that this has not been a comprehensive planning process due to time limitations. So I want to remind you again that these are the policies that we're putting into place for the next few rounds. And we're going to constantly be getting feedback about how it's working and getting more input from communities, and you know, taking a look at how these policies are playing out and making sure they're working for everybody. I want to also remind you of the goals of these of the by and for policies. One of our main goals is to elevate BIPOC owned or controlled developers in the lists, those who have been marginalized and have been historically sort of sidelined by the traditional financing mechanisms in the affordable housing industry. And our second goal is to involve much more community decision making in the process, much more input, much more community values going into these housing developments, and where possible, the community ownership at year 15. So I'm going to go through each of these elements, 1, 2, 3, and 4, one at a time. And I'm going to pause after each one so that you can ask questions. Yeah, Robin, we'll get to that. And we are going to, yeah, there's going to be a lot of questions. Let's just put it to that. So go ahead for the next slide. Okay, so this is the one of the bigger categories. The 2 biggest categories are about ownership. One is about the upfront partnership or ownership of the project, and that's this one. In this and in any subsequent use of the term BIPOC, what we mean is a Black, Indigenous, or other person of color whose identity reflects the identity of the community to be served. If there is no clear community, racial, or ethnic identity, BIPOC means any Black, Indigenous, or person of color. If you are a for-profit organization, it's a very simple, more than 50% ownership of the company. If you are a nonprofit organization, and we're talking about developers that are sponsors that are going to come in on their own with no partnership at all, then you'll get some points for having the majority of your staff being BIPOC, some points for having a BIPOC executive director, and some points, 1 point for having your board be more than 50% BIPOC. This was a direct result of community feedback saying that more than 50% of the staff was the highest value. if you are going to partner with someone, and we anticipate that many of you are going to want to partner with someone in order to get some of these points, even if you are not an entity that meets the definition of BIPOC as laid out above. You have two options. You can sponsor, the sponsor can partner with a BIPOC organization where the BIPOC organization has more than 50% ownership in the general partnership. We realize this is a really lofty and high goal, but we want to hold it out there as kind of the holy grail. And as we have conversations with investors about the 51-49 split, et cetera, we want to hold this out there as what we're striving for. You can get points, less points for partnering with an organization where they do not get more than 50% ownership. But we require that if you're going to get these points, that the BIPOC organization receives more than 40% of the developer fee. And there's language later on about deferred developer fee, et cetera, and that they have significant development decision-making power. That demonstrating that is going to be in the weeds that we'll work on a little bit as we go along. But for now, this is what we've got. So I'm going to pause there and ask for questions. If you have technical questions about tax credit stuff, Lisa's going to try to address that. Yeah, so I see a couple from Robin.
Right. So I answered Robin's kind of last question, I guess. We're still going to get into the CBO, I think, a little bit more of the definition of community-based organization. But yes, if you're a sole entity sponsor, yes, we mean a single asset LLC that has a general partner that is just one organization and that the GP is part of the partnership. Yes. Any other questions on this section? Folks can raise their hand as well, or I think you can actually just unmute yourselves.
We'll also take questions at the end. So if you think of something later, of course, just bring it up later. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Oh yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I have a question. I will digest this and reflect on it. I'm sure people will have questions over time. My first question though is the partnership. As you probably know, Beacon and our parent company, Human Good, have partnered on a couple of projects with BIPOC organizations, and I think it's been a really good partnership. I think that we would receive 3 points in that case. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's reflective of the value of those partnerships. So I would advocate that be more like 5 or 6 or something. And I would add the idea that long-term, post 15 years.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. This is just one of the 4 categories. So maybe it's best if we actually run through the whole thing so that
then pause for questions.
Yeah, that you understand the full range of options and points, because you'll get more than the 3. This is just one of the 4 categories, and long-term ownership is another one of the categories.
Got it.
Let's maybe.
I do have one other question. So the 3 nonprofit point categories, mm-hmm. If a nonprofit hits all 3 of those, they would get 8 points?
All 8, yep.
Got it. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Next slide. This is the long-term ownership part. It's another high scoring category, 0 to 8. The goal here is to have the project remain in community ownership for the long term. And we're really going loose on the definition of a community-based organization. We are targeting, community ownership, and that could mean a formal organization that you're partnering with that is the true definition of a CBO, but it could also be expanded to include any sort of consortium of folks who have ties to the community, who are capable and interested in having that long-term ownership. So community land trusts, the kinds of folks that you've mentioned, Brian, that you're partnering with, as well as maybe a group of small business owners that are in the community, the group of tenants who are currently in a building that you're going to redevelop. These are just some examples that we've heard from in the last few weeks as we've been talking about this. We we'll definitely entertain all kinds of definitions for this. We realize that this is going to be really unusual in terms of that LLC. And so we want to be very flexible, which is why we're not assigning a specific points for elements. We are going to we're going to look at the back end agreement and judge your points based on how favorable it is to the CBO. So we're putting the power sort of in the hands of the CBO to negotiate those terms, and you will get points for those. Yeah, Robin.
The total value of all of these categories is 26 points.
Mm-hmm.
And is this number 2 reflect the potential of 8 of those 26 points, or am I not understanding?
No, you're understanding correctly.
That's right. And the first one was 8, and then the next 2 are going to be 5 and 5.
So can I just, I'm sorry to make this personal to my agency, but I don't think I'm getting this. So let's take an organization like Lehigh that's embedded in many BIPOC communities in Seattle and King County for that matter. And we run tiny house villages that benefit neighborhoods, but we would get these points even though we work across several communities, or the community-based organization still is, I mean, it certainly fits for Beacon or Lehigh's development consulting work. For example, we're working to empower historically Black church organizations to become developers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you're working, Robin, with the Black church and the CD, you would get these points potentially if they've had ownership. But if you're not working, if you're just Lehigh going out into a community, then you're most likely not going to get these points.
Because despite the many things we do in a community, we would not be considered a CBO.
Correct.
Okay.
And we're not, and we will define that further to be that it's not just development, housing development, that it's, it's a broader definition of what it means to be community-based. It's not just that you've developed a project in there. Okay. So, but yes, I mean, so this is the thing, we've tested lots of, Lehigh was one of our tests. Yeah. Africatown was another one of our tests, Ethiopian Village was another one of our tests. So, looking at our current, makeup of projects, which obviously, we're trying to change some of that, but looking at the existing makeup, we did, there's points, there's levels of points for everybody with the main points being for Black owned, organizations, BIPOC organizations.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was following. Thank you.
But yes, there's all kinds of different levels for everyone to get points. That's what we're trying to encourage, lots of different creative partnerships and community engagement. Exactly.
For especially this category of points and the next one, I think, we're going to really encourage you to come to us and talk to us about your partnership, your potential partnership, because we don't know what's out there until we see it come in. So we're going to kind of be, pioneering this for a little while, and having conversations with individuals among you. Then we want you to come in and talk to us about the CBO that you're considering, or the, whatever other kind of organization you're considering for the long-term ownership. David, do you want to address that, Lisa?
So the CBO partner threshold is 50%, but they may need more than 50% of the back end. I mean, they need to own, yes, they need to
They have to own it outright
at the back end. At 15 years. Although having said that, I guess is there some range of points? I mean, I guess I'd be interested in what you think you would structure otherwise. You would still want some ownership interest, I guess. Do you want to expand on what you might be thinking? Or what if they don't exercise their option? I mean, we can cross that bridge when we get to it. And
Yeah,
yes, David.
I think what we're going to be looking at for this application is what it says in your agreement. So if the language around the option is strong, if the language protecting any kind of deferred development fee for the organization is strong, if
how much decision-making
Mhm.
authority they have, either certainly upfront, but then on the ongoing operations. I think that's where we'll get into the ranges.
Yeah, but obviously if they don't exercise their option, that will be in 15 years from when we approved your project or not. So we can't really make that a requirement. Okay, next slide.
Unless, David, did you want to expand any more on your question or your?
Yeah,
thinking?
I guess, it's similar to the new TDC concept in that it's, relatively subjective or at least comparative to the other projects you receive applications for. So, I guess I just have no idea what this range will be, and therefore we have no idea going in how many points we'll qualify for, which is pretty darn difficult. So
Yeah,
not really a
so
question.
right, no, very helpful, and I think we'll define it. We'll have it defined, so it won't be subjective. There'll be criteria, and
Okay.
and I'm gonna switch up the TDC thing. We'll get to that. Based on people's feedback from last week, I'm gonna back away from that. So
Do you want to address Robin's question as well?
we do not usually have the partnership agreement at the time of the bond cap application. Well, you might have to.
I think if I could, we're talking about two different partnership agreements. Usually, Robin, I think we do have the partnership agreement for the general partner.
Right.
And that's where the terms of the, back end or 50
Decision making or
split, decision
right.
making authority, that kind of stuff is. So that's what you'll be looking at, Lisa, I assume.
Yeah, we would want the operating agreement between the nonprofit partners. Exactly.
There will be, the only subjective part of this will end up being, does the organization qualify as a CBO? We're going to try to make as many parameters as we can around that, so it's highly predictable. But again, this is where we really encourage you to have a conversation with us about the entity that you're considering, so that we can reassure you that it's going to get the points for you that you want. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. This is another category where you're going to need to consider that CBO partner, because we do want to encourage partnerships where ownership is not an issue at all. This has nothing to do with ownership, either up front or at the back end. This is an entity who is not going to have any kind of ownership in the project. This is for an entity that you're going to partner with in terms of having them as a tenant on your first floor commercial, or you're going to partner with them in terms of programming for the development, or you're going to program with them in terms of your community engagement process. These are the folks that you are already, many of you, partnering with in order to hear the community that you're developing in a little better. And you're going to get some credit for that, some points for that. So in this category, we are turning that over to your community-based organization partnership, to them, that organization, to determine if again, this is a point of leverage for negotiations with the CBO, so that they can get what they require out of the partnership. So if that's some kind of favorable lease terms, or if that's simply being paid for their work, to get you to the point where you have a partnership that will get you these points, we're open to any kind of benefit that they may get. And we're going to need for not you as the developers, but for the community-based organization to document the process and the results of that partnership, and that's how these points will be allocated. Next slide. The last slide is not about the identity of the partnership or the developer at all. This is about the meaningful community participation and decision input process. The community, the definition of community is going to depend on the location of the project. In some cases, it's clearly identifiable by census data and other fairly objective sources. In some cases, it's going to be a little more nebulous, and we are going to provide help for you in terms of defining that community. And you're going to get up to 5 points in this category. You'll get 3 points for using a community engagement process that is approved by the commission. Our idea is that we'll have sort of a menu of 3 or 4 community engagement toolkits that you can use that are kind of approved by that we've vetted them. And I want to reassure you also that there's not going to be any redundancy with existing community engagement requirements by jurisdictions or by the ESDS process that you already have to go through. This is going to be augmenting that, but there's not going to be the same process in 2 different places that you have to do it or fill it out, or 2 different meetings. So the engagement part is the 3 points. If you can demonstrate that significant development decisions were made as a result of this community input, that will get you another 2 points for the total of 5 in the category. So, obviously this is trying to incentivize a little more community input. And this is also an opportunity for you to, because you'll be engaging with community in kind of a more deep and maybe earlier way, they might be able to have choices offered to them that where you can talk about your budget and you can talk about the trade-offs that are going to need to be made for the kinds of things that they want. You can explain to them, well, if you want larger units, or if you want this community amenity, this is the cost, because we need to keep this budget down. And they're perfectly capable of making those decisions. We may consider waiving the commission approved toolkit. This is going to be at some cost to you. And if you are shifting that cost in order, this will have to be a part of your project budget. And if that project budget is put in the hands of a community-based organization who will do the community engagement and lead that process with those resources, then you will not have to use any kind of approved toolkit. We trust those community organizations to do that work. Okay, Robin.
I find I have to think about this category, and I know there'll be future opportunities to provide input. This one has me puzzled, I have to confess, because I'm thinking about how we do outreach with community-based organizations. This, in order for me to prove that development decisions were made as a result of community input, I would likely show the community a less excellent and less well thought out design, because I'm going to need to chronicle what they tell me I should do, which I probably already had planned to do, but in order to get credit for the community telling me to do it, I'm not going to show all my cards. So for example, in a P zone, we voluntarily chose to make our sidewalk wider and provide more green space to create a buffer between the pedestrian experience and the roadway. Now, the community we knew wanted that. It made perfect sense. But believe me, in my community meeting, I'm not going to show that we were already thinking and considering their point of view and needs, because I've got to make sure that I can chronicle and prove that they had the idea rather than our excellent architect team. And so I honestly, as an executioner of projects, I just have some concern about the documentation and how we get the credit for our forethought, such that we go to meetings and we say, you know, we know this community well, we've been in touch with this community for many years, we have other projects in this neighborhood. Maybe it's a small point I'm making for 2 points. I don't mean to belabor it, but I think there are some consequences if you're on the execution side that are time, money, and maybe perhaps a little bit of manipulation. So I'm concerned about that.
I hear you. I think one of the things that you just said in your concern was indicative, which is we know this community, we've been invested in this community and listening to this community for a long time. That is a possibility to go into your documentation. So it may not, we may be able to kind of stretch the definition of, you know, what it says is made as a result of community input, not necessarily this community process, but community input, meaning that if you can document that your architect did that because of the community input you've gotten before, then that can probably be used as evidence. You don't have to change, you don't have to kind of dumb it down in order to manipulate the system. We're looking for true and genuine community engagement. And if you have done that already, and if you do that on a consistent basis already, then documenting that and showing it to us will get you those points. Let's see.
Yeah, there's a lot. So let's start with Colin's questions about when do you expect these approved toolkits to be identified?
Very shortly, within the next month.
Yeah. And then with the higher points, Joanna is asking, with the higher points for the toolkit, favor projects just getting started versus projects further along, which have been engaging community for some time. And I think, Carrie, you partly answered that. If you've got an engagement process, you just need to show us that. The toolkits are really there to help folks that maybe aren't as experienced with community engagement. So I think we're also open to, if there's a community that's engaging, then show us that. And then Michelle kind of followed up with, are we really talking about aesthetic aspects of the project, or are we talking about uses within the project?
I think
And
both.
Yeah. And then could it be an option? Oh, wait, I think David's actually question was before that. David's asking about could it be an option to document support? No. I'm sorry. David's question was, would a design review board or historic commission's mandatory design meeting input process qualify? And I think that's a no.
Yep.
We're looking for above and beyond kind of what you are already mandatorily required to do for permitting. This is about community engagement and engaging the community. And so it's not about the mandatory requirements you have for design and permitting. Could it be an option to document support opposition to project features and also document changes? I think that's
exactly what we're looking for. Yeah.
And then Amanda, I think is more of a comment. It is also that the community supports and agrees with design and development decisions. Absolutely. And very helpful. Thanks. Okay, for a city project, then the Department of Neighborhoods outreach requirement is not sufficient. And I think that is correct.
Yep. That's exactly the idea.
This is going above and beyond. For points, you don't need to, right? This isn't a threshold requirement, but it is what we're trying to incentivize with points.
So now, having seen the entire range of 26 points, any more general questions? Go ahead, Robin.
Sorry, I didn't have anything else to say. I just removed my hand. Thank you.
Okay. We anticipate you'll have a lot of questions as you're contemplating going for these points, and I welcome any time a conversation. I will update you as far as when we put up the toolkits. We're going to have a survey about this going on with I think we're putting that out next week to try to get
on all of this.
Yeah, on all of this, to try to get some of your reactions that you'll have a time to think about and give us some input then. And we'll be, constantly, this is an iterative process. So, as it stands now, this is what will be in place for the 2022 round. And it may kind of shift and change as we get more experience with it for, rounds thereafter. But this is the basic idea will not change. Michelle.
Just a quick question about community-based organization. This is a little bit different than Robin's point, but I guess what I am wondering about is a lot of times when in other programs that I work with, community-based organization is geographically defined.
Mm-hmm.
And but I am also, working with organizations that I would say represent a community that is not geographic, but is BIPOC in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I assume that you're including both of those types of things in definitions, that there could be a community that is not necessarily tied to a zip code.
Yeah,
right.
we would consider that in relationship to the project that you're building. In other words, if you are if you're partnering with a community-based organization that isn't geographically defined, but is sort of a BIPOC organization, and the reason you're engaging with them is because what they want is a new place to live in the neighborhood where you're constructing,
right?
Then yeah, that would absolutely be qualified.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we realize that there's been a lot of displacement too, right? So to the extent that you're trying to regain access to an area where there's been displacement, for example,
Absolutely.
that's another example that we've thought through or tried to think through, I guess, in terms of how does that impact community, right?
Any other questions? All right, thanks for your attention. I'll leave my part here, and please, again, contact me if you have any other ideas or thoughts.
Okay, so next slide, I think, is cost efficiency. And yeah, I'm going to just maintain the current point structure, which is the 10 points up to 25% below TDC limits. We are going to review the TDC limits. We've done some analysis, and a big shout out to Heather Burns and Elizabeth Reinhardt, who just dug into some of our numbers and did some amazing analysis for us. And one of the key takeaways was that Seattle clearly has much higher costs than even King County, and clearly higher than Balance of State. So we're gonna do a deeper dive into the TDC limits and probably have a separate TDC limit for Seattle versus King County. Although King County may end up kind of with, the I-5 corridor. So we'll have to see, but we're gonna redo the TDC limits and we're gonna stick with the point structure as is to have points tagged to TDC. So based on kind of the feedback we got from last week's discussion about cost points, and given all of the changes that we're making, I think we'll wait on thinking about how we do cost efficiency. We had a really interesting conversation this morning that really challenged me in a way that I haven't been challenged, I guess, so far on this issue in terms of what does this all mean. But I think comparing like projects, there's still something really there as a nugget in terms of a policy approach. And so I really want to continue to think about cost efficiency points, but for now we'll keep them at 10 points with the current structure. And then, yeah, we'll do separate TDC limits and probably different boosts for either wage rates or large households or certain things. So we're going to still look at how we define the TDC limits. And I see there's a couple of hands, so let's start with Cyrus.
So with my biggest question around the cost efficiency, and maybe this is the conversation you were just having, is sort of how maybe when you revisit this, you'll consider this, but like how you are considering cost efficiency in the sort of long term of the project's lifespan. So thinking about how things like solar or green roofs or these other things that really go towards energy efficiency and the long-term operating costs of the project, that increase costs up front, but decrease operating costs long-term, how that all factors in is really my biggest question.
Yeah, that's a good question. It really hasn't factored in at this point, but that's something for us to think about as we think about these TDC limits. We certainly are still going to have points for energy efficiency that we'll get into in a little bit. So,
Okay.
I mean, that's still a priority for us. I think acknowledging that the Seattle code and that Seattle projects are more costly and therefore creating a separate limit for Seattle projects hopefully helps to address some of this. But yeah, there's a lot around the cost piece that we're still trying to figure out. So for now, given, like I said, all the changes that we're making, we still want folks to think about costs as they relate to choices, but yeah, we're going to have to do more work on it. But for now, for 2022, we're going to stick with what we've had.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Okay, Robin.
So you decided not to narrow that range. So because it's right now a whopping 2.5% below cost limits to even get 1 point, and you're going to stick with that up to.
I mean, that's, I mean, in looking at the data, like it didn't really show that we should change the range
It
necessarily.
made much difference.
Yeah. So and again, I think this is one
I
of
know
those
that was
areas.
being considered earlier, so I just was wondering if.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. I've had, I don't know how many different reiterations of this cost stuff, but many. And as we looked at them again, I just thought, you know what, like I don't know what makes more sense. So maybe we just keep it. One of the things that we're going to keep the same, just so that people have something to hang on to for that.
Thanks.
Any other questions about this? We may not have the TDC limits readily available in the next month. We're going to try, but I just wanted, at least as a framework, that we'd have the same point structure and the same structure in terms of points against TDC as opposed to the comparable ones that folks wouldn't be able to assess. So thanks for that feedback from last week. We've adjusted accordingly. All right, next slide, I think, is Eli's. Yeah, so I'll turn this over to Eli to talk about where we stand with solar and energy efficiency and EV chargers.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name's Eli Lieberman, and I'm the Senior Sustainable Energy Coordinator with the Commission. I'm sure many of you know me. The points for solar and energy efficiency this year, very much similar to how they've been the last two rounds, just slightly simplified. So previously we had 2 tiers of solar. We had an option for 3 points that was 0.15 to 0.27 kilowatt hours per square foot per year, and where you've dropped that lower tier since it was not really being utilized, and we're trying to simplify the policy overall. So we're going with just the 0.28 kilowatt hours per square foot per year or higher. Energy efficient buildings, we saw great success off these points over the last couple rounds, with several buildings switching from natural gas to all electric, which was really exciting. And we were seeing the most benefit coming off of the higher threshold. So we're just going to move forward sticking with the higher threshold. So it's the same process as the last couple rounds, where you need to earn, excuse me, thought I was going to sneeze. Allergies are brutal. It's where you need to earn extra points in ESDS section 5.02A from ESDS 4.0, used to be 5.2 from ESDS 3.0. So this is based on the 2018 Energy Code, which I believe all of you will be using by the time we're getting into the 2022 bond cycle. And then finally, really the only change that's going to happen with energy is going to be EV charging points. So the last couple rounds, those have been 5% of the parking spaces, but we're going to increase that to 10% or more of the parking spaces, because starting July 1st of this year, the legislature has instructed the Building Code Council to implement a requirement that all new buildings in the state of Washington wire a minimum of 10% of the parking spaces for EV chargers. So you're going to be wiring 10% of those spaces for the code. So we want to incentivize just going all the way to install chargers on those same spaces at the cheapest possible moment. So that's why we're going to up it to 10% of parking spaces to match the code requirement. To wire 10% of parking spaces. So I think overall, this should just be a little bit simpler, but more or less what we've been working with the last couple of years. That seems to be going really well. So again, if anyone has any questions, just let me know. And David has a question. Eli, has the commission defined the policy on EV spaces with regard to the tenant paying for the power, just like the utilities in the unit? Yeah, David, so we've looked into this a little bit more, and I was going to get back to you. There isn't a definitive answer to this. So Lisa and I were chatting, and I think it's really just down to if your organization and your accountant can make the argument to the investor that these are not the same as, say, a common space where you couldn't charge for its use, then that's something that you could move forward with at your own risk. But according to our compliance department, we're still operating under the assumption that this is similar to a common unit that are common areas.
Or a laundry.
Yeah, like a laundry, exactly, or like a media room where you couldn't charge for its entry. If you include these chargers and basis. So
Right.
that's the feedback we're getting from our compliance, but that's not to say that you couldn't, with your accountant, make another argument to your investor. But you would assume the risk on that, if that answers your question, David. And again, if you don't include these in basis, then you're fully welcome to charge for their use.
So it's a fee for service, and then it can't be included in basis, or you don't charge and you can include it in basis. So the issue is whether it's included in basis or not, and whether it is included in basis or not. And I'm kind of responding now to Robin, is whether or not you can charge, right?
Yeah,
So
sorry about that, Robin. Yeah, so in basis, there's no definitive answer, but the commission is coming down sort of, it's our opinion that you couldn't charge, but not included in basis, then you're totally free to charge. You could be if you're charging for their use. But I'm not compliant, so I don't want to answer that. But yeah, you might want to check on that, Robin. Any other questions?
yeah,
maybe this needs to be a, yeah.
Right. That's right. Maybe that's the issue. Yep.
Yeah, David, I'm happy to continue this conversation offline too, and bring in, Melissa if need be to help us get even more clarity.
Yeah, and we may need to we may need to get some clarity so that folks know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, is it like a utility allowance? I think that's exactly what David was suggesting, that it should be like the utility allowance. So this is a Thomas Stagg question, and we kind of went to him, and he kind of did say he could see it going either way. So I think, yeah, maybe we'll circle back with Thomas and try to get some more clarity on this. Because I think it is like, it's partly, yeah, what's included in basis, and then what, if it is, what you can do versus if it's not, what you can do. So is, I think, the delineation. Okay. Any other questions on these points? Thanks, Eli.
Great. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay, I think next slide.
I think I'm
Right.
back. I'm back. So we're now just going to go into a few more point categories. These are at not quite as high of points as the last three categories we discussed. I mentioned towards the beginning, we talked about thresholds, that we would continue to have some points available for additional low-income set-asides in King and Snohomish counties. And that's what you can see the list of what those would be. We do not have 100% at 50 as receiving points under this scheme right now.
We are starting to see rents decrease in King County. So we're starting to get concerned about the underwriting with folks that have taken the 100% of 50% points. And we're understanding that, yeah, it's an issue moving forward that we're going to see decreasing rents. So income averaging still to get you to the 70%. That could work, I guess. So yeah, we can consider that.
Next slide. Those points are not additive up there, but all of these points as categories are all additive. Yes. Under combo deals, if you're doing bond tax credits project and you're also doing 9% tax credits, we're retaining this as a category, and it's a 5-point category. It's getting closer and closer to lunch, and the side of that hamburger is really appealing. We will now go to the next slide so that, okay, thank you. We will continue to give some points for brownfields, and then a point for historic or adaptive reuse. And I think we had a gray field category, which we are streamlining and taking off the table. Okay, and then for special populations, we have large households at 2 points. We had talked about older adults at 2 points. I think we are taking that one off. So that slide is actually, I think, is
no, I think
Did you stick
we
it back
wanna,
on? Oh, we're
Yeah,
still
I mean,
discussing it.
yeah, I
Then
mean,
maybe.
I think we need to figure out. At one point, I thought we were neutralizing it by taking this whole point category away and having 20% set asides as thresholds, and you could still do 100% seniors as long as you're doing 20% disabled. We wanted to ensure that large households still get some recognition in all this process. So if you're doing 10% of your set aside, at least 10% of your set aside is for large households, you would get 2 points. And then I think there's still the issue about how do seniors compete? Do seniors get the 2 points as well? It may just neutralize all of it. So so I guess the question is there an issue there? Or do we need to do something around that or not? I guess is the question. So I don't know if any.
Yes, these are lower point categories, Brian, because we really want to focus on the basic outcomes and values that we articulated at the beginning. And serving older adults was not one of those values that we articulated. And
it's why we're creating a threshold for it. I mean, we're basically saying you have to do 20% set aside, which is basically what the points, I mean, we had a 10% and a 20% set aside for points. Now we're saying that threshold, you have to do at least 20% of some set aside. So that's why it's a threshold now.
No, my question was going back to the income targeting. Sorry.
Oh, so the income targeting, again, yeah, it's really for Seattle King projects and Snohomish. And yeah, it's threshold for balance of state. It's not as important to us in terms of our outcomes. So, yep.
That
one
just
of the
seems like
trade-offs.
that just seems like a big shift, because I've always thought, the public resource should be driven to the lowest income populations possible. And so that's a big shift not to follow that thinking. So
Well, we are still following that thinking. We're still having points so that you can still, there are still points for that category in King and Snohomish. I think it's one of the limiting factors for balance of state that they couldn't compete based on their rent levels. I am really concerned that the rent levels are decreasing and that deals that took 100% at 50% are not able to underwrite right now. That's what we're seeing right now in the market.
well, that's just a 1 year shift. I don't think that should be a public value that drives your point system. That should be up to the developers and to the staff to underwrite each year to year. But I think that income targeting, the max was 6 points.
Yep.
Whereas just the energy points themselves are worth more
8.
than.
Yep.
So
They're worth.
I can't reconcile that sustainability points is greater than income targeting points.
Yes, I think it is.
That's my feedback.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yep. I mean, we're certainly concerned about the long-term sustainability of these buildings and trying to, impact operating costs and climate change. I think, yeah, if you can always do more, we're just not going to incentivize points for that. Project viability isn't as much of an issue with energy points as it is with underwriting and the long-term operating viability is they're I appreciate that Seattle King projects could go deeper, and you should go deeper if you've got the public resources to do that. I just don't think us incentivizing it with points is good public policy at this time. And we can certainly revisit that if folks want to. So, we're not saying you can't do 100% at 50% in average. We're saying we're not going to give you points for that. So I think that's, the difference here. And my concern is, it's people chase the points. Like that's a given. And I, as much as everybody would like to think they're underwriting, and everyone thinks they can make it work until they can't make it work. And then that's a situation that we're in now. So if we see rents go back up, in the next couple of years, we can change that over time. But this is what I'd like to propose for 2022.
I think this is Heather Burns. I just think that it doesn't recognize in Seattle, King County, where you pointed out, obviously, that Seattle has higher costs and King County does as well, but is that it doesn't recognize the public policy and like alignment with the other public funders that are, requiring at least some lower incomes. And that is how these projects are affording it, is because we've got the soft debt from those projects, so that it's not a matter of not being able to afford it, because the reason you can is you have those commitments. So it just doesn't seem to be in alignment with the public policy of the other public funders in those areas. And that is, I guess.
Yeah, so we still have 6 points and there's still a category. But yeah, from a hierarchy of what we're trying to see as outcomes, first and foremost is the buy and for. Second is cost efficiency, and then all the rest are kind of, I guess the next is energy, and then the next is AMI. So that's, yeah.
By prioritizing that, what you're prioritizing is studios and ones at 60% AMI, which is not necessarily where the need is. I mean, we see, I think it's in Seattle specific, there is a lot more need probably for 50 and 60% units at 2s and 3s And really where the need for studios and ones is at like 30 and 40% AMI. But by emphasizing cost efficiency over everything else, what you're doing is emphasizing 60% units that are studios and ones that are very close to market right now. And so it's sort of like we're producing something very close to what the market is producing, instead of doing what was probably the purpose of the program, was to build what the market isn't building, which is 50 and 63 bedrooms and twos and 30 and 40 and even 50 studios and ones.
Are you suggesting
I
then
mean, I
we
guess
should,
that's where the points seem to be off, that it's incentivizing things that the market is very close to what the market is doing, instead of incentivizing the gap where the market isn't providing that.
so are you suggesting that we should increase the points for large households and not have it 2 points? I mean, we already have it as a
Yeah, I mean,
potential threshold.
Yeah, I would say 2 points does not recognize, especially when, like, as Brian pointed out, you're comparing like the environmental incentives or getting 8 points or whatever it is, that like 2 points does not recognize the cost of building 20% 3 bedrooms in Seattle.
No, it's
Like nowhere near.
Right. So our TDC.
So it's like not incentivizing it at all, basically, almost. Like,
Well,
it's
so our
just
TDC
a throw.
limits.
Yeah.
Right. So we haven't talked about what I mentioned is that we're going to relook at our TDC limits, and we could easily do a boost for large households. We know that large households are driving some of the cost, although some of the analysis we saw was that it's not. But anyway, we're hearing anecdotally how much more it costs to do larger units. So we could do a boost on the TDCs for larger units. Again, we're not prioritizing cost above everything. We're prioritizing cost above a couple of these other things. And you're going to be compared to like projects in your buckets. But yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to incentivize larger units, and we can do that with the TDC limits as well.
Yeah, I guess I think you're not being compared to like projects if you're serving lower incomes and you have family size units, because that's not what you would build if you were focused just on cost efficiency. And so if I was focused just on that, yeah, I would be building studios and ones at 60% AMI, although I'd be nervous about it right now in Seattle, renting those up.
Well, again, our buy-in for community points are 26 with the idea that that's the focus. And then I think, yeah, I think also it's what is the priority with your local public funders as well, because I don't know that I've consistently heard that large households are necessarily a priority, but if it is, then that's again, what we'll see, right? And so then you're comparing like projects. If that is a priority amongst the local public funders and that's what they're funding, then those projects will be compared amongst themselves. So I think, yeah, there's a lot that we're resetting, and I appreciate that these are big changes. And I guess what I'm hearing is that folks are still concerned about that balance of unit mix, target population, AMI, and cost efficiency. So thank you.
Can I clarify one thing? So outside of Seattle and King County, your income targeting policy is that a project only needs to meet the threshold and there are no points available beyond the threshold.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
And again, you could go deeper, but as long as you have the minimum.
Can I make one point?
Absolutely.
So I just want to mention that for many, many years, community meetings have included this statement. There's all this great new affordable housing being built, but none of it is being built for someone at my income level. And I think the point system, while it does create some chasing of points, also helps incentivize trying to build projects that benefit from bonds and 4% credits with a range of incomes such that that accusation becomes less true. And I think that providing more points for deeper income targeting has been helpful toward that goal. And that is applicable to BIPOC communities as well. I understand where you're going, and I believe that income targeting was a win-win for communities, as well as pushing public gap funders to understand the importance of building units that make rents within reach of people who are left out of both market rate housing, but as well, often tax credit financed housing.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
How about the next slide? Should we go to the next one?
Yes.
Nonprofit donation. You get a point if you do a donation to a nonprofit of at least 10 basis points. Same, yes. Next slide. Okay, here we are in our calendar. What we've done so far is our first, oh, I'm sorry, I'm ready to talk. I think this is Lisa's slides.
No, go ahead, Claire. I mean,
I realized I just presumably just went right into it. So we've done our 2 stakeholder meetings that you see on this list. We will have another one next week on acquisition and rehab policies. We do plan to publish an online survey that you can do by email or can be surveyed. And also then the idea is that by July, we will be ready to present our policies to the commission at the July commission meeting, which is on the 21st, I believe it is.
20.
Is that correct? 21st?
No,
Okay, well, it's the 4th Thursday of July. And we don't have the exact date written down here.
22nd.
Okay, thank you.
You were close.
I was very close. And Lisa, I'll now throw that baton back at you because you'll know exactly what else you wanted to put on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we had for today. I'm happy again to entertain questions, conversations, one-on-one or in smaller groups. We'll have this all posted. We'll have a survey for folks to provide, direct comments. We're still going to be working on some stuff. Obviously, we're not completely done yet, but we're framing up as best as we can, as quick as we can. So Robin, it looks like you have a comment.
Just a small point. If it's one round due in March, could you entertain the notion that you would need to close by February of the year following? I keep seeing a dead zone for closings. If it's the bond round due in March and you have to close by the end of December, I'm just worried about deals that could close in the first quarter then. Because normally under 2 rounds, it fully covered 6 months and 6 months for when you needed the bond resolution. I'm just seeing a 3-month gap there. Not to be
my experience is that we always have some lags. So we always have projects that are lagging. We're seeing some big lags right now in terms of projects closing. So it's hard for me to believe that there won't be some that close into the new year. I'm not sure I want to say that right now. I want to keep folks focused on trying to close, but I've also heard some feedback about how important it is to take the time that's needed to
I guess the part that I'm trying to say is that I've never seen the bond program specifically state that there are 3 months of the year that are off the table for closings.
I mean, we really haven't been doing, like, historically, Robin, this is part of why we've moved our application dates at one point so that we could try to close in first quarter, and almost no deals close in first quarter, except for the ones that are really hangovers from the year end. So we always have deals closing in first quarter that are kind of carryovers from year end. We very rarely have seen deals be able to close in the first quarter, even when they say they can. And so, yeah,
I didn't realize that the commission was flexible in allowing you to stretch into the next period of time.
If you, Robin, the issue I think is that we want people to make an effort to close by the year end because bond cap expires and we need to know what, do we have enough cap to be able to do these projects? And you're asking, are we flexible? Not at application, but let's say you are 3/4 of the way through your deal and something blows up. And now you need to push it beyond December and you've got to do it in January, February. Well, we aren't going to yank your bond cap. Maybe we should. Maybe that's what you're suggesting. I don't know, but we won't yank your bond cap at that point. We'll say, golly gee, it really, it's really unfortunate that this terrible thing happened, in the middle of your transaction. And if you have to close in February, then that's what we'll do. That's because we're trying to do good customer service. But it's important that when you apply and your intention is that you're going to close by December 14th or 15th, because we want to make sure we have bond cap for you.
The other interesting issue around timing is that HUD rents usually come out in April. So that's the other thing that people usually wait for. So in terms of closing, again, it's really our experience is that folks don't usually close in January, February, or March, no matter what we've done over time to try to make that happen. So I appreciate that there might be a dead zone, but it's not something that we've seen to be an issue for projects for the most part. I also should mention the TOD and location efficiency, that we are expecting those to be more or less threshold. We didn't speak to them on the slides, but between ESDS and other criteria, we feel like we're getting those things covered. So those are basically now going to be threshold through ESDS.
And also we're looking at a separate, very specific TOD policy that, unlike, you just happen to have a project that might be near a bus stop type project definition of TOD, if the transit authority has a piece of property that they're willing to donate next to a light rail station, that project may get quite high priority, but that has not been completely fleshed out yet.
And again, I just say that public land donation would be included in public leverage, so you could still get into the public leverage buckets with that kind of structure and kind of land donation. So David asked about distributing a point summary similar to the one in the front of the current policies in the point section. Absolutely, that's one of the, we'll get, that project is underway. And so we'll have that available shortly.
That'll be very helpful. This is Brian again. So things that you didn't mention today, like say property type, gray field, brown field, et cetera.
Yeah,
we did mention brownfield. Oh. We're taking away gray field points, but we are still doing brownfield, historic, and adaptive use. So we're 3 points for brownfield. Maybe we could go back to that slide.
That's okay. I guess my bigger question is the list that David asked for. I think will be very helpful because it was hard for me to keep track of. Like, did we, for example, another category that used to be amenities? Did you refer to amenities today?
No amenities.
Are they no points for amenities? No
points for amenities. It kind of can come up in, community in the buy-in 4 if you're incorporating specific community space based on the community-based organization's requirements or requests, right? It's kind of encompassed in your community engagement now is how we're looking at that. So.
And then like project-based rental assistance, is that still in?
Not for new construction. We'll still have it in for AC rehabs, but no, not for.
Right. Okay. Then another comment, the nonprofit sponsor points, I think I'm sorry, not the nonprofit.
Are not
the
points.
Donation,
Yep. Oh,
the donation.
Okay.
Donation. Sorry, I said the wrong thing.
Mhm.
Donation, I think that's extremely undervalued. It's going from 8 points to 1 point. I think that's too big a shift. It's a program that's got a lot of legs and I think has added a lot of value. So I would strongly
Right.
recommend higher points.
Right. Everyone is doing it. Everyone is taking that point. I expect everyone will take that point. Everyone was already taking all these points. We would have done it as threshold, but I think that feels a little awkward.
Well,
So
I would rather see it as a threshold because if you do 1 point, people are going to stop doing it.
We
doubt
were
it.
advised legally that we could not force people to do donations to nonprofits.
Yeah, no, everyone's going to take, who's going to stop doing that point? That's 1 point at least that everyone will do seemingly. But I hear you. Okay, I thank you.
I mean,
thank you
if
for
we
that
need
comment.
to incentivize it, maybe we do. The idea is that we understand that everybody's going to take it. So.
Yeah, I don't think it's one of these. It's a point category that clearly hasn't meant anything in the last few rounds as everyone has taken it. So.
Because it added significant value, but if it's 1 point, people will not take it. So if if that's the outcome that you're looking to hit, then that I think is what will happen. But I don't think you want that outcome.
I mean, is anyone not going to take that point? Who's not going to take that point? Like in this group, is there anyone that would not take that 1 point? I'd be curious. Right, you're going to take it, Brian, right? Robin, I'm assuming
because we have our values are aligned with those points, but there are a lot of bond program users whose values are not aligned with those points, and so
that's not true at all. Actually, I don't see that to have been true. It's been a point that everyone has taken
because it's 8 points.
Yes, and we had closer to 100 before, right? Like. So again, scale wise, we were just trying to scale it. So I appreciate that. What I'm hearing from this meeting is that we should look at scale and that AMI is an important one. Maybe target population is another important one. Donation is another important one in terms of scale. Does that summarize the concerns I've heard?
I think so, because I think target populations makes it hard to keep your cost down, like so doing 3 bedrooms and if you're doing seniors or other special populations that require services, like all of that adds cost to your building, obviously.
Well, if the issue is that everybody took those points and we would like everybody to continue to take those points, we could raise it, but the day that you don't get an allocation because you were 1 point below the line, you'll think about maybe donating next time.
No, these are helpful.
I mean, I think I feel like I have to look at the points all together, but I think there's some, obviously Brian, like Lehigh, Bellwether, we're all going to take that point. Like, but if I'm doing like some kind of ACT rehab or, and I'm blowing everybody out of the water on points, or I'm super cost efficient, then blowing people out of the water on that, like, then maybe I wouldn't take that 1 point.
Well, ACT rehab,
so,
ACT rehab is going to be.
I mean, I don't know what's going on with that yet. So obviously, but like in the past, like, if I had a point that I knew was going to be, and it was only 1, then maybe. So I think it just depends on how all the points come together.
Yeah, I think we're in a really
still takes that or not.
Right. So I think we're in a really highly competitive environment, at least these last few rounds. And if anyone's leaving points on the table, then they're not going to be competitive. So I can't stress enough how we have seemingly scarce resource and way more deals than we have resource for. And the main category and outcomes we're trying to achieve is by the community, for the community. That's part of the reset. And so those are the points that we're hoping folks will actually think about and strategize around. And some of these other point categories, although they have historically been what's been driving the outcomes of this program, we're resetting the outcomes. And we really hope that these by and for community points will be what's driving folks in the near future. I appreciate, and we were intentional in trying to scale things down that have been typically a priority in this program to ensure that we can refocus and reset the outcomes and still try to be doing it cost efficiently. So I know it's a big change, and I appreciate that change is difficult. And I will quickly move to get a point summary together for folks, because I do think that'll be really helpful for folks to kind of see how it lays out. But we're trying to use a bunch of different tools, our targets, our thresholds, and then the points to rank like projects amongst themselves in kind of and trying to achieve some broader outcomes in terms of kind of separating out acquisition from rehabs from new construction, trying to ensure that there's a public leverage path and a non-public leverage path, and then to ensure that there's some balance of state and geographic distribution. So those are our three main goals that we're going to stay grounded around. And then how we also want to prioritize is by and for the community, and we want to do it in a way that's cost efficient and efficiently using the resources best we can. So it is a big reset. So yes, we will definitely be putting the slide decks up, and we'll have the recordings actually up as well, so folks can listen again, especially if they didn't have a chance to participate. And so, and then, yeah, we'll go right into hopefully early next week, a survey and putting together a few more tools for folks to help understand. Again, I want to encourage folks to reach out to us if there's additional presentations or additional deeper dives into any of this. We're happy to be available to talk more about it all. And then, yeah, I invite folks to join us next week for the acquisition rehab, because, yeah, we're going to reset all that as well. So, and that's really separate and apart from this conversation. So, yeah, can't thank you enough for participating and joining us and helping us think through all this. Appreciate everyone's comments and feedback, and we'll take it under advisement. And especially if we make some changes, I'll make sure to highlight that. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you again, everyone. And we look forward. I don't know if folks have heard, I will say maybe a couple things about kind of some of the federal initiatives, but Biden's budget did include a whole new tax credit program, an opportunity tax for multifamily. So yeah, there's still a lot of discussion of initiatives at the federal level that could certainly impact the scarcity of resource issue and could drive where other types of projects could be allocated. So we're still very much tracking what's going on at the federal level, as that could certainly create some additional resources, which would be great right about now, given what we know the pipeline is. So yeah. Thank you all. Stay tuned, and yeah, we'll put stuff up and we'll try to circle back with folks one-on-one or in smaller groups to make sure everybody's tracking where we're headed. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.